Hey, I'm Liz from No Trace. Recently, a friend of mine gave me this cool old jean jacket, but it is worn out in a lot of different areas, especially on the cuffs. So in this video, I'm going to show you how to repair the cuffs of a jean jacket so that you can extend the life of your jean jacket, but also we're going to fix it in a way that makes it unique and your own. So let's go. Okay, let me just show you the area that we're going to be working with here. The cuff is starting to come off the sleeve, and we are going to fix this with just a few simple materials. We are going to be using an embroidery needle and some Sashiko thread for this repair job. You should be able to find Sashiko thread in your local craft store, but if you can't, you can also use embroidery floss for this project. You're also going to need some fabric for this project, and the ideal fabric would match the weight or the heaviness of your jacket that you're fixing. So if you have a denim that is similar in texture and heaviness, that would be perfect for this project. I don't have a denim that I want to use. I'm actually going to be using a linen, and I think it's going to work just fine. You're also going to want a ruler and some chalk for this repair job. Before I forget, the repair that I'm doing on this jean jacket is inspired by Make and Mend by Jessica Marquez. This is not an ad. I just love this book. I love her work. So if you don't need this book in order to do this repair, but if you like fixing things, then you'll probably enjoy this book. And I will put a link to this book in the description box underneath this video. Let me give you a sneak peek of the finished cuff that we are going for. This has Sashiko stitching on the inside, and I think it looks super fun. So I'm going to walk you through how to do a simple design like this. The first step is to measure the area that we are going to be fixing, and this is easiest to do with a measuring tape, but if you don't have a measuring tape, you could do it with a ruler. So we want to measure from end to end on this cuff, and we want to write that number down. So for this jean jacket, the full width of the cuff is 11.5 inches. Actually, it's 11.75 of an inch. Always a good idea to double check. Measure twice, cut once, right? Okay, so I've measured it a couple times. It's 12 inches wide. And then the height of the repair job is kind of, depends on where the hole is, but then you can also make the new piece of fabric sort of as tall as you want. And on the other cuff, I made the repair area about 3 inches tall. So I'm going to write those two numbers down, 12 inches going this way, 3 inches going that way. So here's the replacement fabric I'm going to be attaching onto the cuff. And rather than cutting the exact measurement we just took, we want to add 1 inch to the width and 1 inch to the height. And that extra inch is going to be our seam allowance. So I'm going to cut out a rectangle that is 13 inches wide and 4 inches tall. All right, here is my new piece of fabric cut to size, and in the next step I'm going to actually fold over the edges about 1/2 inch, and I'm going to iron them in place on all 4 sides. Okay, so now that it's ironed, hopefully you can kind of see it looks like this, and it's ready to get pinned onto the cuff. I turned the sleeve wrong side out, and now I'm going to just get my fabric and just lay it right on top of the cuff, and I am lining up the corners with the corners. And I'm going to be using a combination of clips, my handy metal office clips, and some straight pins to get this totally attached. And I just want to point out this jacket has a pleat here at the cuff, and I'm just kind of ignoring the pleat. I'm not adding a pleat to the new piece of fabric. I'm just going to lay that pleat nice and flat and just work with this area as though this were a completely flat piece of fabric. So I'm just going to go ahead and keep clipping and pinning my new fabric onto the inside of my cuff. Okay, I have the new fabric clipped and pinned onto the old cuff. And now I also have a needle and a thread. And what I'm going to do next is I am going to baste the fabric onto the cuff. So what that means is I am just going to make some really large stitches to keep the fabric on the cuff while I do the Sashiko stitching. So these are temporary stitches that are just going to keep these things together long enough for me to finish the repair job. So I'm just going to make my way all the way around all four sides with some big basting stitches. So I'll be right back. You know, I tried to pick a thread that you could see easily. It's more visible on the back side, but the basting stitches are in place and all of the pins and clips are out. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to baste this large rip onto the new piece of fabric. So again, I have a needle and a thread, and I'm just going to sew some really large stitches around this area so that the opening, the tear here, sort of stays put and stays flat in the next step. I've basted the tear in place, and I just want to point out that if you wanted to tidy the tear up even more, you absolutely can trim away the frayed area and fold it under and make it look a lot tidier. So you really have a lot of choices in terms of what you want your final repair job to look like. For me, I am leaving the fray and I'm just going to be incorporating it into the next step. Okay, the next thing is if you have a buttonhole that you want to preserve, I'm going to show you how to create a new buttonhole through the fabric. So you're going to probably want a seam ripper for this or some small scissors, but we're going to cut into the new fabric and make a little opening right here. So I'm going to get my scissors, and I want the opening to be large enough for the button to go into. And once I have a good opening, it doesn't have to be perfect. What I'm going to be doing is actually tucking the fabric back. So I'm going to be folding the fabric under so that the raw edge is tucked away. And then I'm going to be doing a really simple whip stitch around this area. So you might need to cut your fabric a little bit more so that you can get the edges folded under. So just take your time with your scissors and then fold that fabric under. And next I'm going to show you how to do the whip stitch. Now I'm going to show you how to do the whip stitch right here on the buttonhole, and I have threaded some Sashiko thread into the embroidery needle, and I've put a little double knot on the bottom of the thread, and I want to get the thread, the knot, hidden in between the layers. So I'm going to go underneath the navy blue or dark blue fabric and get the needle to come out just under that little folded area. And then my knot should go inside in between the layers and be hidden in there. And then to do the whip stitch, I'm just sewing around the opening and bringing the needle back around. I kind of want the stitches fairly close together here. There we go. And then I'm just pulling the thread all the way through. So I've got my first stitch. And then again, I'm just going to bring the needle around both pieces of fabric. So the jean jacket and the new piece of fabric. And then I'm just going to pull And now I have 2 stitches. You can kind of see them on the, well, you can barely see them, but they're there on the denim too. So I'm just going to keep going around this buttonhole, and I'm going to tuck the fabric as I go so it stays folded there. And I'm just going to keep doing a really simple whip stitch all the way around. So I'll be right back. Now that the whip stitch is finished, I want to create a knot and trim this thread. Now I am the first to admit that I am not the best at hiding my knots, but the general idea is to get your thread under your stitches. So I'm going to go under 2 stitches, and then I am going to create a knot at the end of my thread, a little double knot. So 1 time around, and then a 2nd time around. And now what I want to do is thread my needle back in between those layers. So I'm trying to get it under the stitches again and in between the fabric and the denim. And I'm just going to pull it out on the side, and I want to try to get those knots to go under my fabric. So, like I said, I am not a pro at doing this. Okay, I just had to tug a little extra hard there. So now I'm going to pull hard on my thread and try to trim it close to the knot. And then the buttonhole is finished. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to mark out a grid in order to do the Sashiko style stitching that I did on the other cuff. You can absolutely just do your own embroidery at this point in the repair. The stitching that I'm going to do is something that looks pretty good on both sides of the cuff. So that's sort of what I'm going for. But if you know that you are only going to have your cuffs in one position, you could absolutely work from that visible side of your cuff and just do some really fun embroidery, trying to capture most of the fabric in your stitching. The other thing to decide is which side of the cuff, if you're doing a stitch that you want to see on both sides, which side of the cuff is going to be visible most of the time. So this jacket is a bit big on me, so I am more likely to have my cuffs folded up. So I decided to work with this side as the more visible side, but like I said, it still looks okay from the other side. If you are generally going to have your cuffs folded down, then you're going to want to work from the side that is going to be visible most of the time. So again, since I will probably have my cuffs folded most of the time, I am going to be drawing my grid on the fabric side of my cuffs, and I am going to be drawing a grid of lines that are all 1/4 inch apart from each other. So the way I'm doing this is with a ruler, and it's a little bit tricky because the fabric doesn't really lay flat. So I am going to be placing my ruler on my fabric, and I am going to be marking lines going this way every 1/4 inch. And if you have a marking pen, you should definitely use that for this. I don't have one that shows up on this really dark fabric, so I'm going to be using a little piece of tailor's chalk. But I will say that after a while, the chalk starts to disappear from the fabric as you're working on it. So this is a really great time to use a fabric marker if you have one. If you don't, just use fabric chalk. Okay, hopefully you can kind of see I got my lengthwise lines drawn on there. And I just want to point out, if you have a fabric marker, you can draw these lines onto your fabric before you even baste it in place. And that'll save you the headache of drawing the lines once the fabric is sewn on. So I would definitely do that if you have a marker. But since I don't, I did it this way. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to draw more lines going the opposite direction all the way down the cuff. Again, I'm going to space them. I'm trying to get them 1/4 of an inch spaced apart. So I'll be back. So hopefully you can kind of see I have both lines of the grid drawn onto my new piece of fabric. And the next thing I'm going to be doing is a simple stitch. It's called the 10 cross stitch. And you can see what it looks like more or less here. It's a whole bunch of little crosses. So let me show you how to do that. I have a double knot on the end of my thread, which is already on my needle. And I want to hide that knot in between the layers of fabric. So I am going to start my stitching working on the lengthwise stitches, the ones that run, or maybe they're the widthwise. They're the longer chalk marks on my fabric is what I'm starting with. So I am going to push my needle in between the layers of fabric, and I am going to be drawing single stitches in between these layers, or between capturing both the layers of fabric. And each stitch is going to be about 1/4 of an inch. So I'm just going to be following my long line of chalk and pushing the needle through both layers of fabric from the inside to the outside, and then moving the needle up about 1/4 of an inch using my grid to follow that, pulling it through again and again, making a 1/4 inch or so stitch. So it's just skipping the gap here and spacing these stitches out, following the line that I made. So I'm going to keep doing this. And then I will show you what to do when you get to the end of your row. All right, I have my first row of stitches in place and I have reached the end. So I'm going to show you what I do. I just go from the back, I just skip over to the next row. So that's going to leave a diagonal stitch here on the back part of the cuff. If that really bothered you, you could try to just create a knot and hide it in between the layers and then start your next row with a new thread. But for me, I find that it's not going to be super noticeable. And like I said, I'm generally going to be looking at this side of the cuff. So I'm just going to bring my needle over to the next row. And now I am doing my stitches alternating where the first row stitch is. I want the second row of stitches to be just offset from that. And here I have a little buttonhole, so it's going to be a little bit stiff, but I'm still going to try to get, so I'm just doing my second stitch right here. And then I'm just going to keep working my way down this chalk line that I drew, making a stitch every 1/4 inch or so that is offset from the first row of stitches. And I'm just going to keep doing that all the way down this cuff. And whenever I reach an end, I'm just going to, on the back side, just do a little stitch to bring myself down to the next row. So I'll be back. All right, I finished all of my lengthwise stitches, and what I'm going to do next is I'm going to go over each of these stitches with another stitch to create the sort of star or cross look that I have here. So I'm just going to come from the back and go over this stitch here. I'm trying to make my new stitch the same size as the stitch that I'm going over, so about 1/4 of an inch. And I'm just going to keep doing that, just sort of checking my position on both sides until I have covered all of my lengthwise stitches. So I will be back in a minute. Okay, all of my little crosses are finished. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use my seam ripper to pull out all of the basting stitches. We are officially done with those. So I'm just going to go around and pull these out. And as you know, if you've watched any of my videos, I will save these little scraps in my tiny bit spin, and these can be recycled through 4 days, composted if they're natural fibers, or you can get creative and repurpose them. The next step, which is the last step, is I'm going to be doing a whip stitch all around the edge. And I still have my thread and my needle from finishing up this last row, so I'm going to start over here. The key with the whip stitch is to try to make them the same length and the same distance apart, and that'll give you a nice consistent look. I'm still working on that, so my whip stitches aren't perfect, but that is okay. This is a really nice way to practice getting more precise. So I'm just going to keep whipping around this edge of the cuff from here all the way over to here. So I'll be back. Finally, it's finished. I'm so excited. I did want to point out that I ran out of white Sashiko thread, so I used regular old white embroidery floss thread to finish it up. It's not ideal, but I think it's going to be fine. So let me show you the final look. All right, here they are looking at the outside, and the buttonholes totally work, so that's exciting. And here they are with the outside of the cuff showing. I totally love them. I am so excited to wear my new to me jean jacket. Thanks so much for joining me on this fun repair adventure. And if you have more things that need fixing in your closet or around your home, I am linking to a playlist of other repair tutorials right below this video.